If you missed SmackDown this week and were wondering whether or not to watch it based on this review, we would recommend that you give the show a pass. No, it's not that the show was unwatchable, because there was a lot of good on SmackDown this week. It was just uneventful. Time is a luxury to many of us in the WWE universe, and if we are investing 2 hours of our time into a programme which, mind you, is longer than most movies these days, then it better be worth our time. SmackDown had a lot of room for improvement, and it almost felt like Bruce Pritchard is keeping his best ideas for Raw these days. So, with that said, I'm Daniel from Sportskeeda Wrestling, and here are the best and worst of WWE SmackDown. Before we begin, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that we don't miss any of the fantastic content we have in store for you. Thanks. We start with our first best, and it is that Sasha Banks and Bayley remind us why they're so heavily featured on SmackDown. The whole idea of The Undertaker making a phone call to Bayley is probably one of the funniest things WWE has done of late. Our very own Gary Cassidy sums it up best with his tweet regarding the segment. It's really interesting how Sasha Banks and Bayley kept the SmackDown Women's Championship feud going on in a subtle manner with what they did, with Sasha Banks throwing Bayley under the bus and having her compete with Alexa Bliss and subsequently wearing the SmackDown Women's Championship. These two women have stepped up now that Charlotte Flair is on the shelf and Becky Lynch is gone, and they are carrying the WWE Women's divisions on their back. As for the shots of The Undertaker, do you guys think it will lead to something down the line? And then for our first worst, is this the weakest SmackDown segment of 2020? The story of Jeff Hardy and Sheamus just doesn't seem to end on SmackDown at all, does it? It's just the fact that Jeff Hardy's personal struggles with alcohol addiction were brought to the forefront of SmackDown is something we've seen on so many occasions in the past that it lost any effectiveness on this particular occasion. But it would have at least been justified, honestly, had the segment at the end of SmackDown in the main event been any good at all. But we had Jeff Hardy, who's supposedly a man of the people and a babyface, taking his ire out on a hapless waiter who had seemingly done no wrong to him really. Both Jeff Hardy and Sheamus would do so much better if they started wrestling with other people at this point. The feud just feels stretched out and pointless at this time, don't you think the same? Plus, SmackDown really needs stronger players in the main event picture because this did not cut it at all. Back with another best, and there were 3 solid matches on SmackDown. As much as we can find fault with the storytelling on the Blue Brand show, SmackDown did showcase some solid in-ring action. The WWE Intercontinental Championship match between AJ Styles and Drew Gulak in particular tore it up, and Matt Riddle vs John Morrison was a fantastic contest. But what really came as a surprise on this week's episode of SmackDown is that Shinsuke Nakamura scored a clean win over Kofi Kingston, who is of course a former WWE champion, as you well know. One has to wonder if this is a sign that WWE management believes in him and that he and Cesaro could be considered a potential SmackDown Tag Team Championship pairing in the days that follow. Also, what did you guys think of Daniel Bryan appearing versus Zoom during the AJ Styles vs Drew Gulak match to lend his expert opinions? We quite liked it and thought it was an interesting way to keep the feud alive for a while more. Back to another worst. Another match is going to be replayed on SmackDown. Yes, it's understandable as to why WWE has to resort to replaying old matches considering the overall situation of the world at the moment. But just like most of you guys have stated before, replaying old matches in their entirety might be a bad decision when a large portion of the SmackDown audience has already subscribed to the WWE network and do not want to see their paid content replayed for free on the show. Moreover, there are so many ways to kill time creatively, and more importantly, the audience may tune out if they see old content on SmackDown. Then there was the package that promoted the swamp fight between Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman at Extreme Rules. It just felt like SmackDown went through the motions with it. Obviously, it was well made, as one would expect from WWE. Somehow, the fact that the horror show is repeated so many times during the broadcast just lessens the impact of the saying quite significantly. And we end on a best/worst, some heavy hitters missing from WWE SmackDown this week. Otis should have been on this week's episode of SmackDown, considering that he's the current Mr. Money in the Bank and, let's be honest, one of the most popular stars on SmackDown at the moment. We wonder if it has to do with the boat trip that Sonya Deville and Mandy Rose took recently, as a result of which Otis had to stay away as well. Then why is it a best, you ask? Well, Drew Gulak got screen time and he really showed us what he is capable of, but the time that was reserved for Sheamus and Jeff Hardy in the main event would have been spent better had SmackDown's more popular acts been on the show. But maybe it's a good thing that Otis, Mandy Rose, Sonya Deville and even Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt weren't live on SmackDown, considering that absence definitely makes the heart grow fonder. Especially if you consider that the SmackDown audience of 2020 is a lot more fickle than it ever has been. And that's our best and worst for this week's SmackDown. Did you enjoy the show? Don't forget to let us know in the comments below. Please do tune in for the upcoming episode of Unscripted on Tuesday 11 PM Eastern, as our senior analyst Chris Featherstone goes live with Muhammad Hassan.